Welcome back to the first ever episode of The Report. I'm your host, Martin Mont, and I'm the economics expert at the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies in Boston.
And I'm your host, Josh Wolitke, the political correspondent here for the podcast and the environmental expert.
Absolutely. Now, Josh and I had been doing this podcast for an entire season under the Eastern Mediterranean Times. It continues to be under that, but we're changing the name The Report.
Yes.
And we're changing up the format a little bit here. It's going to be a little bit more conversational than the last one.
Yeah.
But it's still going to be just as informative.
That's the goal.
All right. Now, the first story we have, and the first story that was written in our newsletter that you should definitely sign up for if you haven't already, is the divide that's growing in American policy as President Biden coming out in the State of the Union with some pretty strong remarks about this hypothetical red line over the city of Rafah within Gaza that they don't want the Israeli offensive to cross into.
Yeah. So this is like a big shift that we're seeing in the foreign policy of the United States, which has been fairly focused on looking at a future in which Israel has its sovereignty secure. That has been the main goal of the United States pretty much throughout this conflict. But now, as this humanitarian crisis has been growing, there's over 30,000 people who have passed in this conflict. Now there's this shift in perspective that President Biden and his administration is looking to pursue humanitarian aid more and pursue a ceasefire. And he's looking at the situation in Rafah right now and saying that this has to stop. And on top of this, we've got Chuck Schumer also coming out and saying that there needs to be a political change in Israel. Not only a ceasefire, not only more humanitarian aid, but elections to get rid of Bibi Netanyahu. Because the Democratic Party and Chuck Schumer being one of those leaders seems to have had enough.
Absolutely, and the whole world community is on board with that notion. For the most part, everyone still has their differences. The UN still not able to come to an agreement,
Right.
Because again, there's different seats of the Security Council that are going to veto resolutions brought up by the other. That's kind of
Right.
just how polarized it is right now. But the World Central Kitchen, which is an aid organization, a global aid organization, just launched a boat from Cyprus carrying 500,000 meals headed to Gaza. They've served over 50,000 already since October 7th attacks, and it's hosted by the WCK founder, Jose Andreas. He's a chef from the United States.
Yep.
He has 4 restaurants in Washington, D.C. They're excellent. You should definitely check them out.
Yeah.
He's worked a lot with the New York Times, and the WCK, has a great track record in distributing aid, specifically meals, to people in need throughout the world. This is a huge shipment coming from Cyprus. It still isn't enough food that needs to get in, and that's kind of the problem that we're facing today. And the U.S. is trying to address that with the construction of something off the coast.
Yeah, so the United States is looking at trying to build a pier, a mobile pier, that would be able to be pushed towards Gaza and then would allow for an increased amount of shipments coming in by sea, which is much easier than by air, which is what the United States is currently doing, for aid shipments in food, water, medicine, electricity, and other critical components that all of these innocent people and all these displaced people need on the ground now.
Absolutely, and just coming at it from an even more macro perspective, you're going to need a port to rebuild Gaza.
Right.
Gaza right now doesn't have a big port. And if you want to get the materials, the raw materials that are going to be necessary to reconstruct the cities that have been completely decimated by conflict, you're going to need a lot of resources coming into the city. And they don't have that structure, the infrastructure, to allow those materials to come in from the Egyptian border. They don't have the infrastructure to allow those materials to come in from the Israeli side, because those are very locked off. It's considered, many consider it before the war to be some kind of an open air prison, to put that in quotes, but it's locked to itself, and they're going to need to get stuff in to rebuild it.
Yeah, of course. And that's critical to the efforts that the United States and its allies are trying to achieve right now. It's first, we need to try to get humanitarian aid in. second, and a really close second, get a at least humanitarian ceasefire that would last for some time, and hopefully the United States has already been saying, President Biden, one of them, saying a permanent ceasefire. But eventually, the third step is recovery, rebuilding, and fingers crossed, a two-state solution.
Right, and Joe Biden was very vocal about that at the State of the Union.
Yes, he was.
And after.
Yes. His come to Jesus moment with Bibi Netanyahu on the hot mic after the State of the Union.
Pressing for a two-state solution.
Yes, exactly.
And so the U.S. position, again, dramatically shifting from its old position on this issue of Israel. And so our second story is somewhat similar on human rights issues.
Yes.
But it's a shifting across the Eastern Med to Tunisia. Tunisia is the first country to codify biometric security into civilian IDs and passports. Now, people have been doing this with military passports, military ID for a while throughout the world, specifically in countries like the US, where military identification is going to be biometric because you need to get into a secret, secure facility, or you're going to have access to certain documents that you need to really prove that your identity before you're able to access. But for civilian usage, it seems a step too far.
Yes.
And this goes, again, there's laws being drafted up, and last Wednesday they passed in Tunisia's parliament, and they even went a step further to exclude the amendment to this brought in by the opposition that was to at least stop the centralization of building some form of centralized database for these biometric security. Because again, a centralized database is by and large the worst option if you're going to be collecting a ton of data and storing it, and this is very personal data.
Right, and it's very vulnerable in such a centralized area. That's easy pickings for hackers or anything like that to try to come in and steal this data from all of these Tunisian citizens.
Absolutely, and it's a huge human rights issue. Tunisia, not the best track record when it comes to journalists, not the best track record when it comes to freedom of the press, free speech, and those are global initiatives. The UN and AP, they're very vocal about these issues, especially when it comes to Tunisia. This is not going to help.
Yeah, I mean, Tunisia is considered at the moment a backsliding democracy. There's a lot. It was like the model after the Arab Spring, perhaps the success story of the entire Arab Spring. But now we're seeing an unfortunate backsliding in a lot of those democratic and human rights ideals that were set forth in the new drafting of the Tunisia constitution after the uprising.
Right. The ex-Tunisian president spoke out a couple weeks ago about that, and he's actually been barred from coming back to Tunisia again. He's still in France right now, but that's again just another showing that the government continues to, as you said, backslide, and the breach of human rights here is one that I, for one, really hope does not spread as a common thread, because that goes even further than some of the post-9/11 policies in the United States, which have gone very far with the Patriot Act.
Right.
And still, we don't need to press our thumb on a ID to go into an airport. So it gets very complicated, but it's something that the region should definitely watch out for. And I don't recommend other countries start to do.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to another story, huge story this week, is we would be remiss if we weren't to mention the Greeks and their policy in the Aegean. Specifically, do you want to talk about the meeting that the Greek PM had with Volodymyr Zelensky? Yeah.
So we're looking at right now Greece, as we've been reporting on, if you've been reading the newsletter, they've been passing a lot of domestic legislation. It's just as a little bit of a background. They've been doing some environmental protection work, some work with same-sex marriage rights, all these things that have created some controversy, also fixing the economy within Greece as well.
Right, and that's part of the environmental policy, to be fair.
Right. But they've been focused very much on domestic issues. Now, after it seems like they've gotten a good amount of their agenda done, there's enough controversy that the Greek government wants to maybe cool off a little bit, have a little bit of put the domestic stuff on the back burner. They have shifted to foreign policy. And what is a better way to start off doing that than meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine?
The master of modern foreign policy himself.
Right. And actually showing that Greece is right there with Ukraine, that they are going to help them facilitate that battle against Russia and ensure that Ukraine stays a democratic state.
Right, and that's Greece coming at it as an EU player.
Yep.
And it's also right after the Turkish President Erdogan, met with Zelensky as well, because,
Yes.
you know, if Greece does it, then they'd have to do it. But then they met with Volodymyr Zelensky, and they're trying to get a new grain deal done in the Black
Right.
Sea. And that's crucial because there's been large food shortages in the developing world that need that grain export from
Right.
Ukraine. Again, Ukraine was considered the breadbasket of Europe, let us not forget that, before the war.
Yep.
And now Erdogan working out some kinks. Now it still has to be they still have to convince Russia, that's the largest player in the matter.
That's the biggest factor in all of this.
Absolutely, which is going to be the most difficult, but it's a step toward a deal.
Yes.
And if you can sweeten that deal for Russia, that's great. I think they're very amendable to something happening with the grain deal, but having Turkey in on it and then translating that back into the Aegean, the Greeks want an outward policy in the Aegean because they have their own geopolitical concerns in the region, and they want to be a dominant force when it comes to actually facilitating that trade, as you said. They have a very big interest in being the EU member state that says, hey, look, we have a NATO facility here for NATO naval missions.
Yep.
We want to be the facilitators of peacekeeping in the Aegean here,
Right.
because it's a region that is very important to us. A lot of the islands here are claimed by us. They're also claimed by Turkey, but we want to have a presence.
Right.
And it gives them a really good opportunity to actually have a good enough political backing to come out here and put some naval ships in the Aegean.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and we're also looking at just even not only within the Aegean and as the grain deal, that would be really critical. But Greece is also, since it's the geopolitical strategic command area or part of that link for the European Union,
Absolutely.
as you also said, for NATO as well. Looking at towards securing the entirety of the Eastern Mediterranean area with new investments into frigates and Air Force assets.
Absolutely. The U.S. selling them,
Yeah.
I forget if it was F-16s or F-35s, but
I believe it was F-35s.
F-35s, right?
Yeah.
They sold Turkey the F-16s.
Yes.
But the F-35s, that's huge as well.
Yeah. And that's also looking towards securing the Red Sea, which is really vulnerable right now. Greece has been trying to lead the way from the European side in assisting U.S. operations and ensuring that the Red Sea is secure for trade.
Absolutely. And the U.S. operations are crucial, again, for a potential grain deal here, because
Yes.
if the U.S. is in the Red Sea protecting the trade routes through the Suez, they might actually make grain cheaper. If it has to go around all the way around Africa to get to the global south, it's not going to be as effective as a deal that allows you to go through the Suez.
Right.
And that's one of the problems right now, because the Houthi rebels in Yemen,
Yes.
they're disrupting that trade just off the coast of Djibouti, which is in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's a
Right.
24 to 12 nautical mile
Yep.
distance zone across that strait at the end of the Red Sea trade. And if they can't get through there, then it's not going to get to the global south. And
Right.
the United States knows that. They're very present, and this Greek presence is going to definitely help.
Yes.
All right, now moving on to a new segment that we have here. Do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, so it's going to be our honorable political mention of the week.
Yeah, and we have some very interesting choices. It was very difficult to narrow it down, but we felt, what more interesting a political decision and political personality of the week than the Evis Berberi, the Albanian Road Authority chief.
Yes.
Because he's been indicted on money laundering charges
Yes.
in Albania. He's stolen $2 million or 2 million euros worth, which
Yes.
is 223 million Albanian leks.
Yes.
They're here or there, but it's a scheme that's been going on. Vox was covering it because it's uncovering a lot of political graft in Albania's systems.
Yep.
But specifically with the road authority, this is a infrastructure money. It's been given to Albania, and Albania's been allocating it around. And this is civilian infrastructure. This is really important for the government to get out right, and to do right, especially them to keep in power.
Right, it's securing their transit network, which is critical for building up their economic growth and so many other policies.
Right, and so we just wanted to highlight Evis Berberi as the political head figure of most popularity of the week. Here at the podcast, because we think that it's just very telling when you have people who are in high level positions, high enough that they go unnoticed, but they are able to skim off the top, and it's a problem that's happening throughout many different countries.
Right.
It's interesting to see Albania cracking down on it here.
Yes.
And the fact that the investigation is uncovering a large network of people who have been doing the same type of thing. It's just kind of funny that it's the road authority, because it seems like a pretty non-crucial type of gig to be stealing 2 million euros worth of money for.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was the chief of the road authority, I'd be living in just a regular house. I would expect that he is too. I think it would be pretty weird to suddenly have the chief of the road authority living in like a very big mansion.
Right.
But,
no, I totally agree. And I think that it's also showing of Albania's moves to try to get into the European Union. I mean, the Democratic Socialist government in Albania has made that a priority. That Their goal is to strengthen ties with the EU.
Probably not going to happen for a very long time.
Yes.
We can talk to Ambassador Garcevic about this any day, but he's pretty adamant that this is probably not going to be something that happens. But you're right on the money.
Yeah, so this is exactly what the EU is looking for, in the sense of not the corruption, but cracking down on corruption and exposing it and prosecuting it.
Right, and it's a good look to say, look, the chief of our road authority was stealing euros from the government's monies, and European Union, this is one of your things that you've told us to look out for. You've told us to get better at. Here's us getting better.
Right, exactly.
All right, well, with that, we conclude one of our longer episodes of the podcast here at the Report, and it's good to be back. It's good to be back with you, Josh.
It's very good to be back. It's good to be back with you, Marty.
And we'll be looking forward to you tuning in next week as well. We're here at Emmanuel College, and in association with Emmanuel College, the IEMS, Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies podcast on diplomacy and security. Again, check out the newsletter weekly.
Yes.
You can go on our website and subscribe to that. We also have a LinkedIn page that you can look out for events and different policy suggestions that IEMS is coming out with, different studies that we're doing here. So we're rocking and rolling up here at the IEMS.
Yeah,
so
and stay tuned on our Instagram as well.
Absolutely.
For our events.
Absolutely. And drop by those events. So, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.